Good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are in the world. You're welcome to this FIP-YPG webinar entitled, Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. You're welcome to this FIP-YPG webinar entitled Global Frameworks to Support Career Development. So I hope everyone is keeping safe during these times, and our event today will follow this outline. So I'll give an introduction and I would introduce the speakers at each stage and would move into the main event and have a Q&A session. I'm your moderator today. My name is Ayodeji Matuluko, and I'm a PhD candidate at Glasgow Caledonian University in the UK. I used to be the FIP-YPG chairperson of projects in 2020, and currently I'm a remote volunteer with the FIP Commission on Antimicrobial Resistance. This is our event flyer, which you would have seen in social media and emails that have been sent to you. Thank you for registering for this webinar. And these are our speakers today. So this webinar is focused on educating young pharmacists and pharmaceutical scientists on both the Global Advanced Development Framework and the Global Competency Framework. So the Global Advanced Development Framework was developed to support the professional development and recognition of pharmacy workforce everywhere, while the Global Competency Framework was developed by the FIP as a focused support structure for early career pharmacists. This event is made possible by an education grant from Pfizer, who supported the METNA project. So the METNA project was a project that identified the use of competency frameworks and portfolio building as a need across nations. So I'd like to share, first of all, some announcements before we move on. So just for your information, this webinar is being recorded and live streamed via YouTube. And after the webinar, a recording will also be available on the FIP website. If you have any questions during this webinar, please just put it in the Q&A box, and you're also able to provide feedback after the webinar at webinars@fip.org. Also, we encourage you to become a member of FIP by going to www.fip.org/membership_registration. For those of us who are new to FIP, and probably if this is your first webinar, you're wondering what FIP is about. FIP is the International Pharmaceutical Federation, the global federation of national pharmacy associations representing 4 million pharmacists and pharmaceutical scientists around the world. FIP's mission is to improve global health by supporting the advancement of pharmaceutical practice, sciences, and education. FIP's vision is a world where everyone benefits from access to safe, effective, quality, and affordable medicines and pharmaceutical care. FIP was founded in 1912 in the Netherlands. Also, if you are new to FIP-YPG and you're wondering how can you become a member, how can you take advantage of opportunities, you can become a member of FIP's Young Pharmacists Group. If you're a pharmacist or a pharmaceutical scientist or a student under the age of 35, who graduated less than 5 years ago from your first degree in pharmacy or pharmaceutical sciences, irrespective of your bachelor's, master's, PhD, or PharmD conferral, and you automatically become a member of YPG if you meet this criteria. And your membership fee is usually based on your country's income level. So today's event is one of the post-publication series of the FIP-YPG Career Development Toolkit. And coincidentally, interestingly, today is the 1-year anniversary of the launch of the toolkit. So the toolkit was launched on the 14th of December, 2020. So it's quite nice that we're having the last event for 2021 on this same day. So if you have not looked at the Career Development Toolkit yet, you can download it at the FIP website in the Young Pharmacists Group section. The FIP-YPG Career Development Toolkit is aligned with FIP development goals 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9. So now moving on to today's webinar. So today's webinar, at the end of this webinar, our learning outcomes are that attendees we'll be able to describe the purpose and applications of both the Global Advanced Development Framework and the Global Competency Framework. And attendees will be able to summarize the domains and illustrative competencies from the Global Competency Framework for pharmaceutical services, scientific knowledge, and management knowledge. Also, we expect that you'll be able to identify an individual learning plan based on your own learning needs obtained from the self-assessment of the GbCF. And finally, we'll discuss approaches to building a professional practice portfolio. So before we start with our first speaker, we'd like you to please answer a question. So just to gauge your knowledge just before we start the webinar. So a poll will go up now. And the question in this poll is, do you think using a competency framework will help you identify areas of improvement? So you can write a short answer. If you have updated your Zoom, you should be able to type a short answer, or you can put it in the chat box if you're not able to use the function. So just give you a few seconds to complete the activity. Okay, we have answers coming in. Okay, so the poll has ended.
Can you see the results now?
Not yet.
Not yet, so it forwards me to the link.
Okay.
If it's needed, I can read. Can I help you with the results?
Yes, please.
So I see only 15 people answered, and the majority says yes. Yes, definitely. Yes, this framework has great potential. Yes, 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 of course, yes, yes, it will help out. Yes, yes, maybe, most definitely. These are the answers.
Okay, thank you. So we have a lot of yeses. So we'll ask this question again at the end to see how your knowledge has improved after, but we have a lot of yeses. So this, okay. So it appears, okay. So we'll move on now to our first speaker. So our first speaker is Andrea Bruno. She's a senior strategist, program manager, project manager, learning specialist, and researcher with 10+ years of experience in leading cross-functional teams across 50 nationalities and developing global innovative frameworks, programs, and strategies. She's highly experienced in developing both national and global policies, strategies, and frameworks for governments and non-governmental organizations, such as the World Health Organization and UNESCO. As an expert in global health workforce, she has led the strategy and implementation of workforce and education programs and policies for the organizational members of FIP. As a result, our tools are being used by healthcare professionals worldwide. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that lovely introduction and kind words. I would like to thank YPG for once again inviting me to this fabulous webinar. We have a suite of speakers that will guide you through this, especially global frameworks, so how to use them and what are they important. It's fabulous to hear that from the poll, everyone thinks that it's important and it will most definitely help and support your career. So I'm just going to present a little bit on how can it help, what can you do with it, and then Ariana and Kirsty will take you more in depth into how can you work with them in a sense. So moving on to the learning objectives. So my part is really the purpose and applications of the frameworks that FIP currently has, and how can they are being utilized. But a little bit about me, and I do apologize to some of the participants in this webinar. I can see that there are repeat attendees, and I welcome them very warmly. But I think they've seen some of my slides, so I apologize in advance. I will try to explain in the way of what is important for this particular webinar. So a little bit about me. I am a pharmacist by training, definitely, but I took a little bit of a different pathway in pharmacy, not your usual clinical pharmacist or your usual community pharmacy. So in a sense, I have taken all different routes and paths, and I am currently at McCann Health as a strategist. So what you see on screen is a little bit of the path that I took. Mainly started with international associations and federations, where I've learned a lot of other cultures and other aspects of pharmacy throughout the global. I did a PhD, which is the first version of the global competency framework, was part of my thesis, or was the development for FIP. I worked again with associations, professional associations, in the realm of education and professional development and career pathways, especially with the now currently FIP Hub or FIP Education Hub. I've published with FIP in collaboration with several countries, global reports, and I've worked with WHO, UNESCO, and also with UniTwin project. I've worked with national associations, and my previous role was with Monash University as a project manager and a lecturer. So in a sense, I do a little bit of everything. I've done academia, private, and I've done non-governmental organizations. And I've learned throughout that there's no one path for pharmacists, and we can do lots of different things and have a plethora of opportunities and experiences. But moving on to the reason why we're here today, and why is it important to know and to have that supporting career or supporting aspect on your professional development. For a few years now, WHO has published reports looking at strategy for human resources for health. And one important aspect of this no universal truth nor health without a workforce has been that they've included pharmacists and then included data on pharmacists. And that's quite important for us. That was a big step. And that was back in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. But ever since then, they've developed a global strategy for workforce for 2030. And the importance of this report is actually supporting all that also FIP is trying to achieve in advancing the profession. It has 4 aspects that they really want to make sure that it is able to be implemented by 2030. Optimizing the existing workforce in pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals, and that includes also education. Anticipating future workforce requirements, and doing planning for the necessary changes, strengthening individual and institutional capacity, and that's where sometimes we can help and support as individuals, but also strengthen data, evidence, and knowledge of policy decisions. So all to say that all of us are health workforce and can include our professional strategy or our professional pathways in something bigger than us. Moving on to, but what's needed from the health workforce? What is needed from us? What can we do? And especially during the times that we're still currently are facing or going through due to the pandemic and all of the viruses and strengths and continue regulations and strengthening our capacity to do a lot of the things that we did before, but also giving us the opportunity to be adaptable and flexible and demonstrating our capability as a pharmacist beyond what the public were used to seeing. So all of it for the benefit of the public and the patient, definitely. So what has FIP done to support, just click on that, to support some of the educational needs globally? FIP has developmental frameworks, as you can see on screen, but it has based on a vision. And the vision has different aspects to it. It is about the needs. May there be local, regional, national, or even international needs of your current setting. It has the services to address those needs, to meet the needs that we're currently identifying. What are the competencies that are needed to provide those services? And finally, what the education needed to complete or to support the workforce to achieve those competencies. So in a sense, it's all locally determined, and it can be anything, including your own career and profession, if you look at it into trying to be better and achieve a better performance. Socially accountable and also globally connected. Also, in a sense, quality assurance, the education. And some of these will be spoken by Ariana and Kirsty, so I'm not going to go into deep, but this is just explaining initially how everything is connected. On your right side of the screen, you'll see there has been at least 3 now FIP developmental frameworks. You can see the global competency framework as a foundation level, and currently version 2, 2020, that was just launched last year. This year, we've launched the FIP humanitarian competency framework. And below you have also the advanced competency framework. And I'll go in a little bit more into those. But what does that mean? How can we use them, or how can we see what the paths are for us? So this little graph explains a little bit about how can you move from foundation practice to advanced practice and specialization practice, and how does everything fits together. So in the bottom, you can see the broad focus or the narrow focus of your practice, but also on the sides, you can see the competency and performance, but also the stages of knowledge, skills, and expertise. And each square represents your either broad focus, either or foundation or advanced, but even more specialized focus in your practice, although you can be at a foundation level specialized. And what do we mean by this? This is how everything fits together in a sense. The advanced global competency framework sits in the middle of the advanced part, as one would see it. And why is that? The expert practice can be very specialized or specialized roles, so having a narrow scope of work, but it can also be general, and that's why it's in the middle. But on the bottom, you can see that the GbCF can help you in the foundation part with a broad spectrum of practice, and it can be used across all the settings. And the humanitarian one, although it's still a foundation level, it is a more specialized framework. So you can see that it has targeted competencies, behaviors, and indicators for humanitarian arena, or pharmacists working in that arena. And how, again, everything fits together. This is just really an example of a seamless transition between the GbCF version 2 and the advanced practice developmental framework version 1. And this is just one of them. And the cluster that I chose just as an illustrative purpose is about organization and management and how one could help other. So feeding into looking at more advanced practice. And how can you use the GbCF as your in your own career, but also considering your setting? It can be used as a starting point or a mapping tool, developing the practice and also your own development. It can be used as early years, so foundation, your first 5 years into practice, but also if you're returning to practice, or if you're returning to a more clinical role, or if you're looking at what other opportunities within pharmacy you can pursue. So it's very broad and helpful, flexible. It can help translating the what and the how, especially during that initial education. And by creating a portfolio together with other assessment tools, you can use it to develop your career. And both of my next speakers will touch in both aspects, career development and also portfolio. But the GbCF version 2 does not imply that there should be one global curricula that would fit all the countries. It goes back to my previous slide in terms of it should be needs-based. It should be developed from where the needs are in your practice, in your setting, in your own career. And how can you use the advanced practice framework to support the profession progressing and advanced medicines related to, again, all levels. It can be used by you to map and plan your professional development and your own portfolio and career pathway. It can be adopted and adapted by any sector, any setting, as we mentioned, and it complements. We've seen there's a seamless transition between one and the other, but it can also help increase the opportunities for collaboration and learning opportunities globally. Nearly at the finish. So what's the call for action? What can we say about all of this? What we can say is you can develop more quickly in a structure journey. There's evidence to support that by providing opportunities and support and tools, pharmacists do better. You can use the FIP developmental competency frameworks to guide your path. Tools can assist your development. Definitely, we can identify our own learning gaps and address them with those. The portfolio can illustrate your development and impact. And if you're doing it throughout the years, you can go back and see how far you've grown and what you have achieved in such little time. But you can also create your own journey. And as I'm a living example of, you can try anything and everything and decide what you would like to do and how would you like to do it. So my final slide is thank you for listening, but also this is a path. There's no right path. There's no right journey. It's all on experiences and learning and growth. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that introduction to FIP developmental competency frameworks. Very interesting introduction. And so we would like to move on now to another engagement activity. So we have a question for you. So we would like you to answer, what are your current learning needs in your professional practice? So if you can just provide a short answer and yeah. So what are your current learning needs in your professional practice? You can just provide a short answer, or you can include the answer in the chat box if you'd like to do that. Okay. We have 6 responses.
And you cannot see again the answers probably. I will read them. We have only 6 answers, and it's about communication, leadership teamwork, more international connections, a PhD, more clinics, demand planning.
Okay, communication, leadership, more connections, international experience, PhDs. So that's quite interesting. So I'll just check the chat if we have any more. Okay, we don't have any other comments on current learning needs. So thank you so much for sharing your current learning needs, and we hope that the next presentations will provide more insights for you as you plan your own professional journey. And just a reminder that if you have any questions, you can share them in the Q&A box, and at the end of the webinar, we'll take the questions. So I'd like to introduce the next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Ariana Mestrovic. Ariana has been working as a community pharmacist, and she was responsible for education and competency development in the biggest pharmacy chain in Croatia. She's now assistant professor and independent consultant in Pharma Experts International Agency, providing lectures and workshops in CPD programs for pharmacists all over the world, and also implementing new services in pharmacy chains and teaching social pharmacy and pharmaceutical care at universities in Croatia and Cyprus. Ariana serves as a member of the International Services Program Advisory Group for the Accreditation Council for Pharmacy Education, ACPE, in the USA. She was co-chair of the FIP Program Committee, and today she's FIP Vice President of the Academic Pharmacy section of FIP. So she's also a member of the Board of Pharmacy Practice at FIP, the lead for competency development at the workforce development of FIP, a member of PCNA, that's the Pharmaceutical Care Network of Europe, and she's also an international consultant of the World Health Organization and a co-chair of Smart Pharmacies Program. Ariana is dedicated to promoting competency-based education in Cpd Cycle among pharmacy practitioners. So our teaching usually addresses all components of competencies, knowledge, experience, and motivation. Over to you, Ariana.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation, and thank you for inviting me to be with you today, dear friends and colleagues. I can see there are many people here from all over the world, and I was also enjoying to listen to Andrea's presentation. Andrea and I started to study about competency frameworks almost in the same time. It was quite a long time ago, but I still remember some of our conversations that we were actually very surprised about how much we can do with the competency framework. And definitely we thought it is a one-way ticket. Once you open the competency framework, nothing will be the same, because this is not anymore only about knowledge. It is much more. And my task today is to explain a little bit about the domains from the competency framework, the global one, for the early career one, for the based competencies, about how to provide pharmaceutical services. And I will talk a little bit about scientific knowledge and also some management, but also personal competences. And the second question that I will try to answer today is how to navigate the GbCF for proper self-assessment. My goodness, we could talk about those things for hours, but then I will try to be very practical, short, and simple. So as you have seen already, there are a few competency frameworks published by FIP. And what is especially important, I would say that the GbCF Global One was republished last September. So it is renewed and it's enhanced with the more competencies, because the pharmacy world is obviously changing very much. And since the first version was published in 2012, now we have felt a strong need to put some more competencies also in the early career of the pharmacist, but also to check if any competencies have been changed since the last version was published. I'm sure that medicine as a biomedicine discipline, as well as a pharmacy, will really advance even more and more faster in the future years. But also there is that global level that we are talking about today, but all those frameworks you can also adapt and adopt and to use them in your own countries. I had a privilege to be a part of the process in many countries so far. I think it was 17 by now that we have tried to use FIP Global Competency Framework to translate it to the local languages and then to validate and to asked the experts in the field, is it applicable and how much applicable it is for each country? And those countries were in all 5 continents. Also, there is a global advanced development framework that Kirsti will talk much more about today. And it is more like specializing or advancing in different fields of pharmacy. Like Andrea told you, there are many, many paths, and you have seen in her career, there are many paths to follow. So one day you start in a pharmacy, another day you will try to be an educator or regulator or a person who is doing in the strategy or marketing, and the Global Advanced Development Framework would cover all of these areas. But as we said today, let's talk, at least in my part, with GbCF, how to support a service development and service provision. So I will try to prove in a way that competency framework is a frame and the work is with us. So it is our choice how we will choose the behaviors and how we will spend our day in the service in the pharmacy with our customers or clients or patients, however you would like to call them. So, but definitely this is much more than outcome of learning. I mean, we have our own diplomas, but after that, we are not all competent on the same levels in the same fields. So once we combine the knowledge with some skills, but especially with some attitudes and values to perform on desired level professionally, then we will see our special profile as a competency, unique one that we will hold as a kind of a badge wherever we go, and people will recognize us according to the competencies. They will say, oh, this is that lady who knows a lot about vaccination, or she knows a lot about pediatric doses, or she knows a lot about, or she has experience in such and such things. So before that, we were thinking, you know, diploma is here, knowledge is here, let's work. Now we say, no, we need to see what the needs are, what the preferences of the learners are, and we need to find the education who will be built on competency basis. And like that, we can support the future practice in the different aspects of our profession. So again, it is our choice, because we know, all of us know, we know a lot about pharmaceuticals, a lot about medicines, a lot about diseases. And yes, we have some skills, but depends on the engagement every single day, how we will combine those with some attitudes, how we will employ our values to the everyday conversations and the decisions that we are making, so the people can feel how competent we are. They can benefit from the competencies that we have developed. Otherwise, those are just dead competencies on the paper, and no one could benefit from them. So we need to integrate, we need to combine, we need to be creative, and we need to be engaged to be seen as competent pharmacists. So as you have already seen, needs-based education model has shown us years ago that we cannot start from education because we just like the education program. We need to think about needs. And some of the needs that you have put in your poll just a few minutes ago were, of course, some in alignment to the recent development in the healthcare in the world, such as a pandemic. For example, in my country, in Croatia, we have never ever before vaccinating the patients, or even hosting the medical doctors to do so. But now we are doing that. Also, to making some point of care testing and some triage in the pharmacy. We have never ever done that before. We were thinking about it, but we were not ready when pandemic was starting. And some of the Croatian pharmacists, for example, could read in the Global Competency Framework published in September last year that the competent pharmacists of today need to be included in the public services, but it was not happening yet. One day, on the flash news in the evening, and it was Friday, the Minister of Health of our country just announced, from tomorrow, you guys can go to the pharmacy and make point of care test, and we will see if you have COVID or not. Then the pharmacists were learning through YouTube videos, through the very short and simple guidelines. And this is dangerous. This is not easy to follow. I mean, it's nice to say, but we need some knowledge, yes. We need some skills, which means a little bit of experience of a guidance, and then some attitudes and values. So some pharmacists decided not to do that. because A, they don't know how, B, they don't have skills, and C, they don't want to be exposed. So see how dynamic it is. It's not simple. It's not just a request. It's not just a competency on the list of your competencies. It is a real life. So therefore, we need to put the competency frameworks in the context of our own countries, nations, maybe even some cultural background, but definitely our communities that we are operating in. And then now let's walk through those lines. Andrea have shown you some of those and how they are organized in the framework. But I would like just to portray a little bit more about that public health. So the first version, which was published in 2012, and Andrea and I both made our PhDs from this document. But now, I mean, in the first one, I think it was only 4 behaviors were just portrayed in the public health. It was just, just take care about public actions and, include yourself in the national initiatives that you are having in your own country. Now look at this. Response to public health emergencies, assist the multidisciplinary healthcare teams, advise, provide services, be a local source of proper information, do the prioritization from the health priorities in your own settings, counsel the patient, counsel the population, identify sources, be there, be awake, be alive. It is pandemic and you are the pharmacist. So this portrait looks much different than 10 years ago. And what we should do now, we should walk through those behaviors and try to see how far or how close we are, our everyday practice is close to these standards. So if we walk a little bit more, we will see pharmaceutical care, definitely services, as we wanted to talk about services today. So how to assess the medicines, how to compound, and then how to dispense. It is not just a technical thing to do that in the pharmacy. There are many, many details. There are many, many layers that we can go into. There are many, many levels of competencies that we can have here. So how would you measure? How will you self-assess yourself? So you can try to see how frequently you are doing those things in a proper way. Is it rare or never? So then you will put yourself, for example, only 1 point. If there is, just occasionally, then it's maybe 2 points. If it's almost always when needed or often, then it's 3 points. But if it's always when it's needed, then it's 4 points. And then, of course, if you mark all those behaviors with 1, 2, 3, or 4, you will have kind of a score at the end of the cluster, and you will see how far or how close you are to the maximum level of competency, which is expected according to the framework. So some of the next skills, attitudes, values, and knowledge are described under medicines and all about the medicines and medication and using it and being careful about it. Also monitoring. MTM is one of the most popular services in the world now, providing education for those skills and attitudes and values. I know how sweet it is when you start, and then when you complete, especially when you apply, then you are practicing on the different level. Then, of course, patient consultation and diagnosis. So we should know much more than we used to know before. So we need to ask proper questions. We need to make proper decisions. We need to make our own choices, which will sometimes even save lives of the patients. And then we cannot provide services without organization and management skills. I mean, what does it mean if we know everything about MTM service, but how to find the time, how to engage stakeholders maybe to pay for that service, how to manage the human resources around us, because it takes time. If I provide MTM, probably I will be with the patient at least for 20 or 30 minutes. And who will do the dispensing at the same time instead of me? All those kind of things are important to start showing even professional competencies such as medicine therapy management or vaccination or taking care of the complex or complicated cases in the pharmacy and other things. Then, of course, the quality of service is here to be observed and improved. And this is also a competency, because not everyone will be able to judge if it's on the higher level of the quality or maybe middle level, or there is still lots to improve, let's say, in the lower level of quality. Procurement also trying to find the sources for payment, how to make the bills, how to document things, how to prove that we have been doing those things, and how to measure the results. Or maybe supply chain management and workplace management are not on the first side connected with services, but my goodness, they are. If we don't have proper medication on our stocks and shelves, we will not be able to do things without proper logistics. But also the management of time, the management of priorities, the management of change, the management of risks are all going to be hidden behind the competent pharmacist providing services. See how complex it is. And at the end, but I would say even most important, professional and personal. So how do we communicate? How do we share? How do we keep things in a proper way for tomorrow? So how do we educate ourselves? Without CPD, my colleagues, we cannot provide services. Without CPD, without reflection, without portfolio that Andrea just mentioned, without self-assessment, we cannot know where we are or where we should be. Of course, the digital literacy is now needed for the new services. We need to connect with the patients in a different digital way. Often we need to send them notes, maybe reminders. We need to keep electronic records of the patient. This is all new comparing to 10 years ago. And then, of course, interprofessional collaboration and activities. So to include others, to be part of other teams, to be there when it's needed, and to lead and to self-regulate. My goodness, this is really important if we want to provide services. And we might be as well in charge for a group of the pharmacists, or for the pharmacy, community pharmacy, or for the hospital department of the pharmacy. And then to lead the services, definitely we will need those competencies as well. And I believe this is the last slide with the behaviors. We need to know a little bit about legal and regulatory practice to provide services. Otherwise, we will not be able to do that in a proper frame, proper time, proper level. And then, of course, professional and ethical practice and quality assurance and research are also part of providing services to document, to put together, to make results, and to make some conclusions, to learn from our own service development is a competency as well. So I hope this is not scaring you when you see how many of those we should fulfill to be a competent pharmacist of today. I hope this is inspiring for you. And I'm sure that some of you are looking at some lines and saying, see, this is what I was always thinking it is important. So it's a confirmation of your professional attitudes and values. It is the starting point for all of us to start to do things in a proper way. And then the second question was about how to make proper self-assessment. I'm trying to advance slides, but for some reasons it's not happening. Okay, thank you. So once we know where we are, once we make self-assessment, we need to do the different cycles. Opla, now we are a little bit too far. Let me try to go back. Yes, so I'm sure some of you are familiar with the Cpd cycle and the Cpd points. So once we reflect and plan to learn, and once we learn, then we need first to evaluate the competency level. So this is where the competency framework comes from. Once we finish, for example, the course or the masterclass of MTM or the specialization, but then we need to apply. After application, the competency level should change because it's not the same. I mean, once you're going for the course and you finish the course and you have your certificate, or once you are applying those kind of knowledge and skills, attitudes and values in your work for, let's say, 2 years. Of course, your competences will grow because your experience will grow, your attitudes will change, your values will be much stronger, but hopefully the knowledge itself. And then it could be measured. As I mentioned, you can use that scale, for example, 1, 2, 3, and 4 to make the scores. And let's see, those dots are, let's say, this year, and then in 1 year time, you will grow. And it would be possible to measure it. It would be possible to compare one pharmacist with another one. It would be possible to compare year 2020 with 2018. It would be possible to make some conclusions. And this is my work that I published, it will be now 10 years ago, in American Journal of Pharmacist Education. And this was result of the sample of 100 pharmacists working in Croatia, being educated, being encouraged, being motivated to do more. Look how only 12 months of work can change the competency level of a pharmacist. And then at the end, once you try to choose your educational programs, make sure those are quality ones. And there is another framework which is not connected with the competencies as it is, but it's connected with educational programs that you're going to choose to increase your competencies. Make sure that your educational program touches science, practice, and ethics, because those are bases for knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values. Of course, it's important that the program is in your context with good structure, process, outcomes, and impact, but look at the bases. The bases are for competencies. Therefore, before you apply for the specialization course or a weekend course or afternoon course, or I don't know, go overseas, before you pay your ticket, make sure that it will increase your competencies in all levels, in all aspects of competencies. And I'm trying to advance. My last message to you: don't think you will ever be competent before you start something new. No one is, because we all need to be brave and to step out from our comfort zone. Therefore, it's good to have someone who is observing, who is watching, who is supporting, but not someone who is doing things instead of us. Because if we are going to only look at the medical doctors vaccinating, we will never be able or competent enough to vaccinate. So there should be a day one that we start, that we feel a little bit uncomfortable, but without engagement, there is no development. So make sure you have your safe environment around yourself. Make sure to have someone who knows a little bit better, who has a little bit bigger experience, and who has very, very strong attitudes and values. Therefore, you will never fall back at the beginning. You will never give up and say, oh, this is not for me. You will go up and up and up and up. And you know what? Once you're up, there is a better view, and you will see much more things to learn and to be more competent pharmacist of today. So thank you very much for listening. I will be happy to answer any of your questions, and let's try to connect via chat and see what questions do you have for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for such an in-depth look at the global competency framework. And I hope our participants have an improved knowledge on the framework. So just before we go on, just to test your knowledge, we'd like to have another engagement activity. So we have a question for you. So our question is, how do you identify your learning needs? So there are a number of options for you to choose from. So is it by observing and getting feedback from your colleagues? Is it by critical incident review, self-assessment, or reflective practice? Or if you have any other way of identifying your learning needs, you can share in the chat box. So our responses are coming in now. Okay. Okay, keep them coming. Okay, our poll has ended, and majority of our participants identify their learning needs through self-assessment. It's quite important, and that's 68% of our attendees. 55% observe and get feedback from their colleagues, while 48% practice reflective practice, and then 23% critical incident review. So thank you very much for sharing your how you identify your learning needs. So we'll now move on to the next speaker and our next presentation for today. So our next speaker is Kirsty Galbraith. I'm sorry, I hope I pronounced it well, your name well. Kirsty's area of expertise is professional practice in practitioner development, and she is responsible for experiential development and graduate education in the pharmacy faculty of Monash University. And she works closely with the profession to advance practice locally, nationally, and internationally. She works across the spectrum of undergraduates, interns, and foundation level pharmacists, and more advanced practitioners. Kirsty leads the faculty's skills coaching program and has responsibility for the student experiential placement, that's the STEPS program, the intern training program, and intern foundation program, and also the Master of Clinical Pharmacy degree at the same university. Kirsty teaches the Master of Clinical Pharmacy capstone unit where pharmacists build their professional practice portfolio. So now over to Kirsty for your presentation.
Thank you for that introduction, and we're going to come back to some of those things that you talked about very shortly. I'm very pleased to be here with my lovely colleagues, Andrea and Ariana, to talk about this work. And similar to them, this is work that I've been involved in for a long time, and I'm very passionate about it. And FIP provides an excellent platform to be able to share work in this space. And you'll see on my title slide here, I've got some of the development goals listed. And in particular, this talk relates to the development goals 2, 4, and 5. And we'll be unpicking some of that as we go through the talk. So you've heard quite a lot about the global frameworks that are available, and Andrea and Ariana have done a lovely job of setting the scene with that. What I'm going to do in my talk is bring it a little bit more locally to the work I'm doing in Australia, but all of this work is very translatable to a global setting. So the frameworks we use in Australia are very closely related to global frameworks. So while I'm talking about things that we're doing locally, there will be, I hope, I expect, a lot of areas that you'll be able to take away and implement in your own practice. And both of my colleagues have talked about a needs-based approach. So there should be some things in here that you can take back to your own setting. The other thing that I'm going to present is one way of building a professional practice portfolio. And again, it's the way that we have chosen to do it in Australia and the way that we teach our students how to build a portfolio. But it's not the only way. It's not necessarily the best way. It's a way of curating your information into a portfolio. So I'm going to try and keep it general enough that there's something in it for everyone. But just so you know, this is not the only way to do it, and there is not really one right answer. So let's get into it. This is really just another way of presenting what you've already heard around the frameworks and where they fit. And that 4-quadrant diagram that Andrea showed is one that I use all of the time because I think it presents really nicely how your career can progress in a variety of directions. But this is another way of presenting the information. So as pharmacists, as we enter the profession, as you've heard from, particularly from Ariana, we're developing our competencies, so DG5. But in our early years, in our foundation years, which I know many of you in the audience are in this area, we use the Global Competency Framework to describe and inform our early career training and development. And then moving on from that, we move into the area of advancing and maybe specialising, but really advancing in our practice. And we start to move into using the Global Advanced Development Framework to describe what's happening in the area of DG4. So again, there's really nice ways of describing your career development and progression using a range of frameworks that link really nicely to each other. And I'm going to show you again how we kind of operationalize that in Australia with our versions of the tools, which again are very closely related. So a bit about what happens in Australia. We're very fortunate in Australia that we have a nationally agreed set of competency standards for pharmacists in Australia. And all of the little logos in the bottom left-hand corner are the 10 professional organisations, member organisations, etc. in Australia. And our whole profession has agreed on these competency standards. So they are used in numerous settings across our practice sites and our education, and to the extent that they underpin our accreditation standards for education. So really this document is one that we look to on a regular basis to describe what it is that we do. It's the thing that underpins our continuing professional development and, as I said, the accreditation of our pharmacy programs. This is a brief rundown of what the domains look like, and you won't be surprised to see that they're very, very similar to the domains in the Global Competency Framework and also in the Global Advanced Development Framework. And that's because it makes common sense, and also because a lot of these competency standards have been built from the same evidence base. So you would absolutely expect them to be the same. Ours is presented like this with 5 domains. But it very much mirrors the Global Competency Framework. And the way we talk about our domains in Australia is with this stacked diagram. So for every pharmacist in Australia, we are expected to be demonstrating competence in Domain 1 and Domain 2, and 2 of the standards in Domain 4. So professionalism and ethics, communication and collaboration, and some of the leadership and management domains, all pharmacists, regardless of practice area, need to demonstrate those. But the ones that are stacked vertically, medicines management and patient care, the rest of the leadership and management domains, and the education and research domain, really is going to be individualised for an individual pharmacist. So that's where having a portfolio of your demonstrating your competence can help describe the work that you're doing and where it fits. The other thing that we have in Australia, which was developed before the latest version of the competency standards, is an advanced pharmacy practice framework for Australia. And this is the document that maps very closely to the Global Advanced Development Framework that FIP has. Now, because this was developed in 2012 and in our latest iteration of the competency standards in 2016, we amalgamated the two. So we now have a single document, these 2016 competency standards, which have a continuum of development from the general level or the Global Competency Framework level, so pharmacists as they enter the profession. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see in blue 3 stages of development. And thank you for the comment. You don't need to read what's on the slide. Don't worry about the detail. The information's available, but it's really just to show you the concept of what it looks like. So rather than having 2 separate frameworks, we've got a single framework that goes from entry level, general level, and through 3 stages of advancement. So it's like a combined document of the Global Competency Framework and the Global Advanced Development Framework. And again, these are all agreed by all aspects of our profession. The other thing to see on this slide is that not all of our competencies have got advancing practice descriptors. So there's, I don't know, let's say 100 enabling competencies, and about 30 of them have got descriptors for more advanced practice. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how you can use that to describe the work that you do, to talk about your scope of practice, etc. So let's talk about what is a portfolio, because really that's what we're here to talk about. And the document that I'm going to refer to, which is listed on this slide, is a literature review that was published by our Pharmacy Council, which is our accrediting body for education offerings. And they simply say that a portfolio is a formal documentation of training, achievements, and experience. So nothing too controversial there. They go on to talk a little bit more about why portfolios have been used, and as you would expect, it's about professional development. And from my perspective, one of the main things that we use it for is encouraging self-reflective learning. And the evidence is very strong on the benefits of reflective learning in the development of practitioners. So we spend a lot of time on that reflective component. And there are a number of benefits listed on the slide there. But also to know that the contents are not fixed. So like I said at the start, there is no table of contents for an ideal portfolio. What you put in your portfolio is going to vary depending on what you're using the portfolio for, the work you've done, the frameworks you're using. Some of the things that are listed here are pretty standard. You'd have your CV, your qualifications, etc. You'd probably have your CPD. But actually, the portfolio that I'm going to talk about takes it to another level, because rather than just describing the things that you've done and the certificates that you've got, a professional practice portfolio in my setting talks about the impact of the work that you've done and how it demonstrates that you're advancing your practice. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. There are obvious advantages and disadvantages to using portfolios. They are a great way to document the evidence that you've met competencies. And often one piece of evidence won't be enough to describe that, but you can curate your evidence so that it tells a story around how you are demonstrating competencies, and things that would be hard to assess with a checkbox, but you can provide various pieces of evidence to give a more complete picture. We generally use them for formative assessment, so we generally don't put a mark against them. It's about giving the student a lot of feedback about the way they're reflecting and writing their portfolio. I do a lot of work with postgraduate students in this space, and they do complain that it takes a lot of time, and it does take a lot of time. But once they've done it, they realise the incredible value of the work that they've done. And when I did my portfolio, I was incredibly proud of its ability to demonstrate all of the things that I'd done and the impact that I'd had on patient care, for example, or student learning, if that's the approach that you want to take. So in summary, portfolios can be used for undergraduates, for reflective practice, and that's the way we use it. And we use it for postgraduates and in the profession to help describe more advancing practice. So this is how I describe how my career is progressing, and to help me take the next step towards my career as I'm reflecting where my development needs are and gathering evidence to describe what it is that I've done. So the thing that a lot of people struggle a lot with is the concept of evidence and what might your evidence look like. I love this picture of a bookshop, and I use the analogy that each one of us would go into this bookshop and pick something different off the bookcase. And that's what your evidence will be like. My evidence would be totally different to your evidence. And evidence can really be anything. We'll talk about some rules of evidence in a moment, but it really can be anything that demonstrates that you are demonstrating that you're competent in particular areas. So this is the guidance we give our undergraduate students because they don't really know what evidence is at all, but we talk to them about what kind of digital artifacts they could use to support the reflections that they're doing. And that's a skill that they develop over time. The skills coaching program we run at Monash runs for the whole duration of their course. And by the end, they're pretty good. And I would expect that they would be able to go and actually put together a pretty good portfolio of their evidence. But it takes quite a lot of practice. I'll come back to this in a minute. So some examples of where we're using portfolios. I've mentioned briefly undergraduate portfolios at Monash. We also, our interns or our provisionally registered pharmacists have a portfolio. We have portfolios to describe continuing professional development, and we have these professional practice portfolios. And unfortunately, in the time I've got, I really can only talk about the last one, but I can share more if there's questions, etc. But really, we're going to talk about professional practice portfolios. And again, this is where you need to remember, this is the way we do it. It's not the only way to do it, but the way we do it and the way I teach pharmacists to do it is to follow these 4 steps. They define their scope of practice using the competency standards. Then they define what we call their area of expert professional practice. Then they gather and sort and map their evidence. And then they describe the context and impact of their evidence. And we're going to go through each of those in turn. So you've had quite a lot of information now about competency standards. One of the ways we use our competency standards is to describe our scope of practice. Now, I don't know about in your settings, but scope of practice is something that is bandied around, talked about a lot, but actually not necessarily that well understood by a lot of people. And I apologise that this picture is small, but it's available in the competency standards document. But I'm just going to briefly walk you through what we mean by scope of practice. This, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the big circle around the outside with the dotted line represents the scope of practice of pharmacy as a profession. So in that container is all of the things that pharmacists can do described by the competency standards. But what we know is that the smaller circle on the inside, the one that's coloured in a darker blue, is an individual pharmacist's scope of practice. Most pharmacists, the vast majority of pharmacists, don't do everything that a pharmacist can do. They would do a subset of things. So that would be their scope of practice as a subset of everything that can be done. And what sits inside there is the domains of the advancing practice domains. So we have this self-assessment tool that, as you can see, is linked very closely to our competency standards. And what that does is that walks us through the process of defining what our scope of practice is. So we start with this baseline description of what it is that makes up our scope of practice. And the first thing we do is we do a brief description about what it is that we do. And this is a student example, but you know what you do and where you might want to develop to. And then we go through each of the competencies in turn and we describe whether it's relevant to us or not relevant to us. So you remember the stack diagram at the start. Those compulsory competencies are ticked automatically. But if otherwise, you have to go and tick the ones that are relevant to your practice. And then as part of your reflection, am I okay with this? Do I need development or not? What is my development need for my current practice? And what development need is required for my future practice? So it's getting us to really think about what it is that we do and where we want our development to go. So this is really still focused on the global competency framework, the foundation competencies, the entry to practice for everyone. But as we move on, defining your area of expert professional practice is something that's more associated with pharmacists putting their portfolios together to describe more advanced practice in the global advanced development framework. And this concept describes the particular field or subject where you feel you could be acknowledged as an expert, even though you're developing. Now, this is mine. And this might sound familiar to you because this is what AODG read out at the start. So I use this as my bio, my introduction to people. You might have heard people talk about an elevator pitch. This is my 50-word description of what it is that describes what I do. And there were some other things after it as well. But if I had to tell you in 50 words what makes me who I am professionally, this is what it is. So we spend a lot of time with our pharmacists workshopping this. It's really quite hard to do. And we spend a couple of weeks workshopping it with them, giving them a lot of feedback, getting it really tight and making them bold in describing what it is that they do. And the reason this is important is because it underpins the tone, the breadth, the scope in the professional practice portfolio, because everything that you put in your portfolio should ultimately link back to what you've defined as your area of expert professional practice. So in my portfolio, there's not a lot of stuff about patient care because I don't really do patient care anymore. I do practitioner development and education. So everything in my portfolio points to that. So it helps provide an anchor point for the things that you're putting in your portfolio. Excuse me. So here's my bookshop again, because we've moved on to the next step where we're gathering and sorting and mapping our evidence. So what we get our pharmacists to do is look at the competencies and then work out what things they've done and how that evidence maps to the competencies. Generally, each piece of evidence will map to more than one competency, and generally each competency requires more than one piece of evidence to tell the story. So, you know, my portfolio's got maybe 100 pieces of evidence in it for 30 competencies, but they all cross-pollinate each other. There's a couple of things to keep in mind about the evidence that you put in your portfolio. For somebody else to be able to look at it and be confident that it actually is representative of your work. Is it valid? Is it relevant for the claim that you're making against the competency about your performance? And can it be validated? So is it a document that's got a header and a footer and a date and maybe a signature on it? Or is it something that's a Word document that doesn't have any file names or anything in it? So you've got to be able to validate it. Does it authentically describe what you've done? Or is it very general evidence that talks about what a team has done? And that's really hard for people because we want people to work collaboratively, but we train them into thinking about if they've got a document that represents what a team's done, to try and make sure that it also highlights the things that they've done as an individual. So it might be minutes of a meeting where they made a significant contribution, and that needs to be included in the minutes. Generally, it should be about no more than 5 years old, but that's smudgy. And there has to be enough of it to tell the story that you're trying to tell. And then finally, this is the thing that is quite specific to the Australian context. We get the pharmacists to write a context and impact statement, which really curates their evidence into a short summary that describes how they meet a particular competency. So I'm just going to show you what this looks like in the portfolio. So this is a particular competency with 3 levels, and this description, it's in Latin, you're not supposed to read it, it's not actually words, is a little narrative about how their evidence demonstrates that they work as a member of a multidisciplinary team and accept expert advice through consultation. And you can see it's got little numbers here, that's the number of the evidence. So the evidence is cited as they're writing their statement. So I can look at that and I can see the case that's being made for what this pharmacist has done, and I can then go and have a look at the evidence which has been submitted in support of the work that they've done. I'll just go back. This is not a very glamorous slide, but it's basically to show you that the platform we use for portfolios is just a Google site. And my message to you is don't put off doing a portfolio because you don't have a fancy piece of software. You can build this anywhere. It can be paper, or it can be a Word document, or it can be a Google site. And we use a Google site that can link to all of the evidence that the pharmacist has gathered. And it's just a really nice way you can share it with people so they can give you feedback, etc. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to wrap up, but I just wanted to say probably the most important thing about this process, I don't want to skip too far forward, is evaluation and feedback. Now, we do evaluate our portfolios because some of my students are, they're enrolled, but actually the most important thing is working with people who can give you feedback on the work that you're doing. This is a really hard thing to do, to put together a portfolio like this that tells a compelling story about you as a pharmacist and your advancing performance. But the best advice I can give you is to work with a friend, work with a peer, find a mentor, and give each other a lot of feedback about your evidence and about how you're demonstrating that you meet the competencies at the level you've chosen. So I'm going to stop there. I apologise, I've gone a bit over time. I think you've had a good summary from the others about why you might choose to do this for career development and to reflect on areas of focus for development. So I hope that's been helpful to you, and I'll hand back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Kirsty, for a very insightful presentation on how to develop a professional practice portfolio. So just to remind our audience that you can put your questions in the Q&A chat box. And so we'll be moving on to the engagement activity, our last engagement activity. So the same question we asked you in the beginning is what we'd like to ask you now. So do you think, after listening to all the presentations, do you think using a competency framework will help you identify areas for improvement? We had a lot of yeses in the beginning, so hoping we can get more responses this time around. Keep them coming. Okay, our poll has ended. We have just 20 of our participants, 16% participating. So,
Yes, I would like now to read the answers, and the majority of them is yes, one is definitely, one is yes profoundly, and yes of course. So everyone said yes.
okay. Thank you very much everyone for sharing your insights. So now I would like to invite all panelists to please put on your videos, and we'll move to the Q&A section. So we have a couple of questions from our attendees. The first question we have, which I'm not too sure if it's quite clear, but the attendee is asking about the pharmacist's role on World Framework for Healthcare. I don't know which one of our panelists would like to take that question, although it's not quite clear. World Frameworks for Healthcare. Perhaps
we might need a little bit more of an explanation on that one, but I'm guessing it's also to do with WHO and how the strategy is coming together, and you know, pharmacists' role in it. And I think FIP has worked very closely this year and in past years with WHO, especially during the pandemic, and especially on their areas for diseases and NCDs, chronic diseases. So I think there's always a role for pharmacists to play when it comes to healthcare, absolutely. And I think it's really about also us voicing our medicine expertise. What do we do and how we do it, and how can we contribute to better healthcare? So it is always in terms of maybe more of an advocacy role that we can play as individuals, but definitely I know that FIP has been working closely with WHO and UNESCO and others to support that awareness of what we do and what is our profession and how can we contribute to better outcomes. So I hope that I responded in a way to that question, if it is what they meant by it, but thank you for that question.
Thank you very much for answering. We have a question for Ariana. So Oyeka is asking, so aside the fear of stepping out of someone's comfort zone, from your own experience, what other barriers to competency development exist, and how can they be overcome?
Yeah, it is a change, and always when there is a change, there are obstacles. And I would say it is all about change management. So it is about acceptance of the other people around you. If you want to evaluate yourself or to develop yourself, other might have comments about that, other might be happy about that or less happy about it. Because once, for example, if the competency framework is introduced into one organization, it will probably mean something if you are on level 1, 2, 3, or 4. So some people can't wait to start. Some people can't wait not to start, because this is like a look in the mirror. And it is, I would say, the organization should be mature enough to be ready to make assessments, even more self-assessments, because once I'm less competent than Andrea or Kirsty, or is more competent than me, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to her? So is it just for our education, or does it maybe mean something in the career development as well?
Thank you very much for your insights into the question. So we have a question for Kirsty. So Oyeka is also asking, so in Australia, is the National Pharmacy Regulator different from the body of pharmacists in the country? And who has responsibility for ensuring adherence to the National Competency Standards Framework for Pharmacists?
That's a great question. It's not me, that's for sure. Well, as you saw on my slide, we have 10 pharmacy organisations in Australia, and maybe each of them would say they're responsible. Ultimately, our regulator is the Pharmacy Board, and the Pharmacy Board of Australia is would probably be the one who's ultimately responsible. So they're responsible for registering pharmacists via an exam, for instance, and that's a competency-based assessment. So they would be the gatekeeper for entry to the profession. But there was another part to the question, and I can't remember because it's gone. We'll just have a look where it says answered. So the other area where the Pharmacy Board plays a role is pharmacists in Australia have to do a mandatory continuing professional development. So you have to have a learning plan, which you can do from that self-assessment form that I did, and you have to do a certain number of credits of CPD, and it's all linked to competency, and you can be audited. So you are taking responsibility that every year you've assessed your learning and identified those competencies where you need to do work, and that you've actually done some work to develop those competencies. And if you get audited, it's expected that you can demonstrate that you meet those competencies through that process. So I'd have to say it's the Pharmacy Board ultimately as the regulator, but all of the organisations live and breathe, all of their CPD, everything is really linked to the competencies.
Thank you very much for answering the question. So I'm guessing this next question is also for you, Kirsty. So Gladys is asking, so defining your area of expert practice is in the singular. So sometimes people will have multiple strengths.
Yes, and we hope so. So that's why it's hard. And in 50 words, it's really hard. And often while it says area of expertise, it can often be quite broad. So it could be patient care, or it could be patient care of elderly people, or it could be patient care and education of students. So it doesn't have to be really, really pointy, because that'd be sort of more on the specialised part of that quadrant. It can be quite broad, but still, is it patient care that makes you special? Is it education? Is it leadership and management? It's often related to one of the domains, but it's quite challenging. It takes people a while to get their head around how to describe that. And that's why it's not something you just, write it down and it's easy. You need to find someone to workshop it with. So it's really clearly telling a very type story about what it is that makes it's your special sauce. That's what we call it here. What's your special sauce?
Thank you very much.
And let me just add to that. As you can see, mine is it has multiple strengths in the variety of fields. So it's really about how you see yourself and adding to that contribution. So and you can fit anywhere in the frameworks, I can guarantee you that, because it is that aspect of having multiple competencies and multiple areas that you can act and pursue. Absolutely.
And it does change over time, doesn't it, Andrea? You've a really good example of that, where that your statement from 10 years ago would be totally different to what it is now. So it does, and that's fine. It's a living, breathing document. You change it anytime you like.
Absolutely, and it's about evolution and growth, and trying different things and knowing, okay, I want to do this, or I want to do that. And I did academia before. Now I'm in a global company on communication and advertising. It's completely different, but the core aspect of being a pharmacist, knowing practice and knowing medication and being that expert has led me to here. So absolutely.
Thank you very much for the insights. So our final question for now is, so how can professionals develop competency in industrial pharmacy practice and standouts, especially in manufacturing? So which one of our speakers would like to please answer this question?
I can take the first stab, let me say it like that, and then others can contribute. I think it's really about looking at the competencies and behaviors and indicators in the GbCF, maybe particularly when you start, depending on where in your career you are. The organization and management, as Ariana showcased some of it, has a little bit of component in manufacturing, not in depth, but is about looking at it and enhancing with the needs of your practice. You can always stand out in the leadership domain, in the personal and professional aspect. So the framework is flexible enough for you to look at your own needs and how in your practice you can look at, and I'm guessing manufacturer will be more about systems and optimizing procedures, looking at if the standards are being up to date, what is it that you're developing in that particular aspect of the manufacturing. But there is always an aspect of the personal, how you also talk to your colleagues, the communication aspect, how does that lead into patient safety, or quality assurance of the process. So there are several aspects that you can have a look and identify that for your specific area and setting, it's still applicable.
Yes, and if I may add, I mean, once you open the global competency framework, it might look to you it is only for community pharmacists or hospital pharmacists because it's more oriented to the services, to the contact with the patient. But as Andrea nicely said, there are many competencies that you could start from, even if they are not so specific to the industrial one. For example, if you remember that little graphic about needs-based education, you can ask yourself, what are the needs in the industry that I'm working in today? And then what are the services needed in the industry that I need to provide? Is it, quality assurance of the project, or is it the project management? Is it the financial perspective of your work? Is it analytics, whatever it is, or marketing? And then you can say, okay, now what competencies do I need? And this is how you start your reflection. This is how you start to think, where should I be? What should I do? And then your Cpd cycle, number one, can start. Once you go through number one, then you can say, look, there are now some new things. So I'm a different person. My reflection is different now. So let me try to do it. And one more thing, if you want to build your competences, if you want to build the knowledge, you know how to do it. Click on the link, read things, try to connect with people who are providing education in your field, go to the master classes, whatever it is, buy the book. If there are skills that you need to learn, then please try to find the mentor to work with. Try to find the role model to observe. And then attitudes and values, definitely you need someone who is more experienced than you. You have to look at someone's work or someone's success or someone's not success to see how would you like to act and what do you need to know, to do, and to be a competent in industrial pharmacy.
Thank you very much for the insights. So we have no further questions, so we'll move on to closing the webinar. So just to let all participants know that you can register for future FIP digital events at the link here, so events.fip.org, and the recording of this webinar will be available on the FIP website, and you can also watch on the FIP YouTube channel. So thank our speakers today for your time and for sharing your expertise on the different frameworks and how to develop competencies and how to develop a professional practice portfolio, and wish everyone a safe time and wish you Merry Christmas and Happy New Year in advance, and we hope that you enjoy your holidays. So thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you at the next FIP digital event. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.